Today is Monday, which means Reactor Magazine has released 2 more Wind and Truth preview chapters. Today they released chapters 1 and 2. In this video, I'm going to give you my thoughts on the 2 chapters and some of the things that I noticed when reading through them. First of all, we get an official sketch from Shalon's sketchbook of the star spren that her and Adolin saw in Rhythm of War. And what's interesting about the sketch, it doesn't only include the star spren, which looks really cool, but it also has this face down here in the bottom right-hand corner. I think maybe it's one of the unmade Ba-Otto Mishram. So the reason I think that might be Ba-Otto Mishram drawn right there is Shalon sees this star spren in Rhythm of War chapter 34. She says, Adolin, it's a star spren. That's a star spren. And then later in the book, in chapter 115, Shalon is speaking with Mraize, and she's asking him questions about Ba-Otto Mishram. She asks him why he wants the gemstone that holds Ba-Otto Mishram, and Mraize doesn't respond, and she tells him, I am going to find that gemstone before you do. So I think it would make a lot of sense if she sketched the image of Ba-Otto Mishram around the same time as drawing the star spren. And that artwork is by Ben McSweeney. All right, then we get into chapter 1, which is titled Unfamiliar Ground. We get the epigraph, which is from the in-universe book titled Knights of Wind and Truth. It simply reads, I should have known I was being watched. All my life, the signs were there. So if I have to guess, this book is probably going to be written by both Kaladin, representing wind, and Szeth, representing truth. Maybe they'll go back and forth, writing different passages in the book. I don't know who this line would be by. It could be either of them. Then the chapter begins with Kaladin saying he feels good, which is really cool to see from Kaladin since he suffers with depression quite a bit throughout the series. But yeah, he says he feels good, not great, but he feels good. So we see that Kaladin feels a little bad that he feels good. Like he feels a little guilty because he thinks, yes, he did help protect Urithiru from the fuse, but the victory came at an agonizing cost. And also there's the contest of champions happening in just 10 days, which is going to decide the fate of all Roshar. We also find out that Kaladin has stepped down as leader of the Windrunners, but we see he's growing as a character. He's starting to realize that even though he doesn't feel great right now, someday he would. And that's really great to see from him. We also learn that now that the sibling has Navani as a bondsmith, the tower is fully functional again. Urithiru is awake, as Kaladin puts it, and his lashings are lasting much longer than they normally would. Instead of a few minutes, they're lasting for upwards of 10 hours or more. And then we see Sil. She's now walking around at human size. She's learned how to color her dress. So it's no longer just shades of blue. She has now added bright violet embroidery on her sleeves. We're once again reminded just how much is at stake with this contest of champions coming up. So if Dalinar wins, Odium had agreed to withdraw from Alethkar and Herdaz, though he could keep other lands he controlled like Iri and Yakaved. But if Odium wins, everyone was forced to cede Alethkar and Herdaz. Plus, there was a greater cost. If Dalinar lost, he had to join Odium, become fused, and help conquer the Cosmere. So it's almost like a lose-lose situation for them. I mean, they only get to keep 2 countries out of the entire land of Roshar if they win. And if they lose, then Dalinar is going to become a mind-controlled supervillain, essentially. Kaladin and Sil kind of have a little banter going back and forth. Sil makes some jokes about highbrow comedy and punchline. And then Kaladin tells her it does feel warm to have finally figured a few things out, to let go of the weight and step out from the shadow. I know darkness will return, but I think I'll be able to remember better than before. Remember what? That days like this exist too. Kaladin is in a great state of mind right now. He seems to understand that he will become depressed again because he just has that tendency, but he has a much better outlook on it now, and he thinks that he'll be able to remember the good days, even when he's in the depths of his depression. And then he thinks about Teft. And this is a theme throughout both of these chapters. He says, I feel as lost like a hole in my own flesh. So he's extremely hurt by the loss of Teft. Teft was one of his best friends. So of course he's going to grieve over his death, but he's handling it so much better than I would have expected, which is awesome to see. Speaking of Teft, you guys recently voted that Teft was the best Stormlight side character in the most recent Cosmere face-off that we had on the channel. If you guys are new to the channel, these Cosmere face-offs are something that we do. I create brackets for different Cosmere related topics, and then you guys get a chance to vote and determine who moves forward in the bracket. So this most recent Cosmere face-off is what's the best type of Radiant Spren? And we're only 2 days into it so far, so if you guys want to join in on it, make sure you hit that subscribe button. A new poll will be posted each day, and you'll get to vote on who moves forward in the bracket. We also learned that the wind spren that make up Kaladin's radiant armor stay close around him, and he's able to pick them out, apparently. Here we see wind blew across him, bringing with it fresh scents of clean, crisp air and a flock of wind spren, including those that made up his armor, who soared in around him. They stayed close in case they were needed. I thought that was really neat. It's not just some random wind spren that happened to be around him at the time that come in to make his armor. It's actually a specific group of wind spren. And then Kaladin hears a voice. Somebody says, "Kaladin, I need your help. I'm so sorry to ask more of you." And Kaladin isn't sure where this voice is coming from. He asks Sil if she can hear it. And Sil says she feels something on the wind. The voice tells him, "A storm is coming, Kaladin. The worst storm. I'm sorry." And then the voice is gone. Kaladin asks Sil if the wind is alive. And she says everything is alive. So Kaladin thinks it's the wind speaking to him. And that would be interesting. I don't know. It could also be perhaps one of the heralds speaking to him, or one of the unmade. So we know that Szeth heard voices like way back in his past. Here in Oathbringer chapter 92, he's talking to Nightblood, and he says, "I knew a voice like yours once, Sword Nimi. The whispers? No, a single one in my mind when I was young." Szeth shaded his eyes, looking across the glistening lake. "I hope things go better this time." So this voice that Kaladin's hearing could possibly be coming from the same source of whatever was talking to Szeth way back in his past. Let me know your thoughts on the voice down in the comments below. And then we get Shalon's perspective. So she's still at lasting integrity. She has pattern and testament beside her, and she's thinking about all the people she'd been, the way she changed based on perspective. I don't know if that's specifically talking about the various personalities like Veil and Radiant that she created for herself, or if it's something deeper, maybe a foreshadowing of some kind. And then we learn that Testament responds differently to being a Deadeye than Maya does. Maya is physically still very strong, where Testament is physically weak. It seems that Spren can break in different ways, just like people. Shalon asks Pattern if she could heal Testament if she rebonded her, and Pattern apparently has spoken with Kalek, and Kalek is under the impression that she's still bonded with Testament. So it sounds like because Shalon was a child and she broke the bond without full intent, that the bond is damaged, but it's still there. The connection still persists. And then we get more confirmation that Deadeyes did not exist before the Recreants. Pattern says, in the deep past, Deadeyes did not exist. It was what they'd learned in part from the Honor Spren and from Maya. The Deadeyes, all of them except Testament, had been bonded to ancient Radiants before the Recreants. Together, they'd rejected their oaths, humans and Spren alike. They'd thought it would cause a painful but survivable split. Instead, something had gone terribly wrong. The result had been the Deadeyes. And then Shalon hugs Testament, and we learn another interesting tidbit. So Pattern's robe is always hard and stiff, but Testament's bends like cloth. So I'm not sure if that's because she's a Deadeye, or maybe different cryptics can decide how their clothing feels. And then we get to chapter 2. This chapter is titled Family, and I thought this was an extremely wholesome chapter. Kaladin hangs out with his little brother, his mother, and Sil for most of the chapter, and then he even hangs out with his father for a bit, and they're all just kind of laughing and joking around. It really feels like the peace or the calm before the inevitable storm that Kaladin's almost certainly gonna face later in the book. We get another epigraph, which is another passage from the Knights of Wind and Truth. It reads, "I first knew the wind as a child, during days before I knew dreams. What need has a child of dreams or aspirations? They live and love the life that is. So this sounds like it was definitely written by Kaladin, if I had to guess, because he's talking about knowing the wind. And right off the bat, we learn that Radiance can apparently use tower light to power their surges. Light here was constantly replenished, and holding the tower's new light seemed not to push him to action the way Stormlight did. Instead, holding it was calming. So I thought that was extremely interesting to learn that Radiance can use more than just Stormlight. I'm gonna guess that they can use Tower Light because it's a mix of Honor's Light, Stormlight, and Cultivation's Light, Life Light. But I kinda doubt that they'd be able to use just straight up Life Light. The only Radiant that we know that can use Life Light is Lift. She actually can only use Life Light. She can't even take in Stormlight. But she can probably use Tower Light too then, I would imagine. We see Kaladin displaying some more signs of PTSD. He's getting very jumpy. It says he's lately become more prone to overreact to loud noises, including ones that, upon reflection, were obviously nothing dangerous. We learn that Kaladin and Sil have developed a pretty clever way to indicate if she's displaying herself to everybody or if she's hiding and only displaying herself to Kaladin. So this new procedure is when she appeared with color on her clothing, like the violet on her sleeves, it meant she was visible to others. When she appeared as a uniform light blue, only he could see her. We see that Kaladin is once again feeling bad that the contest for the fate of the world is approaching. His best friend is dead, and he's playing with blocks with his little brother. A familiar voice speaks to him from deep within. Hold to this, Cal. Embrace it. I didn't die so you could mope around like a wet horn eater with no razor. And unlike the voice that he's hearing in the wind, this one doesn't seem mystical. So he knows that this is what Teft would have told him. And he thinks that he knew him long enough that he could anticipate what the man would have said. Now, I saw some people theorizing that maybe this is actually Teft speaking to him as a cognitive shadow. I don't think that that's the case because Moash killed Teft with a shard blade, and he stabbed him through the neck with that shard blade, and shard blades sever the soul. I don't think that somebody with their soul severed from a shard blade can last long enough to even become a cognitive shadow, but maybe I'm wrong on that. You guys are gonna have to let me know down in the comments if that's even possible. We learned that ever since the tower has become fully functional, Sprin are appearing everywhere, far more frequently than they do outside of the tower. So my thoughts on that is that the sibling and Navani's bond must be increasing the connection between the physical and cognitive realm within the tower. We find out that Sigzil has been going to important Bridge 4 meetings in Kaladin's place. And then Kaladin, now that he stepped down from Bridge 4, he's asking himself, who was he? What was he? And then the voice starts speaking to him again. You are, the same voice said softly, you are what I need. And Kaladin is fully convinced that he's not imagining this voice. We learn that the tower is now warm and the pressure has equalized, and the entire city seems to be infused like a sphere. Water now flows on command from holes in the walls, and you could control its temperature with a gesture. Kaladin is starting to notice that Sil is acting more and more like a human. She's making her face look like it has sweat on it. He notices that Sil is apparently starting to practice Vorinism in a way. She wears havas now, and when she's not in her hava, she wears a glove on her safe hand. And that surprises him because she had never bothered with that before. A bit later, we learn that Kaladin's eyes are light blue now, perpetually seemingly, and they never fade back to their proper dark brown. I mean, I assume that that's just because he's constantly taking in Stormlight or Tower Light, but I assume if he stopped using light altogether for a while, then they would fade to brown. And then Kaladin kind of reflects back on how insane his life has been in the last couple years. He says, well, despite his tension, he let himself bask in it. Family, peace, Sil. He'd been running from disaster to disaster for so long, he'd completely forgotten this joy. Even eating stew with Bridge 4, precious moments of respite, had felt like a gasp of air when drowning. Yet here he was, retired, watching his brother play, sitting next to Sil, listening to his parents chat, storms, but it had been a wild ride. He'd managed to survive. So yeah, I mean, Kaladin's in his early 20s and he's lived a crazy, dangerous life. I just realized it's only been like 2.5 years since the start of the series. At the time of Wind and Truth, it has been 7.5 years since Gavilar's assassination, and the Way of Kings main storyline happened 5 years after his assassination. So it's only been 2.5 years that all these events have taken place. And we learn from this wob here that Kaladin was only 20 years old by the end of the first book. So yeah, he's only in his early 20s, and for the last 2.5 years, he's been on this wild ride of killing and near-death experiences and losing friends and loved ones. It's pretty crazy. So that's why I think that this is such a good chapter. Kaladin finally gets a chance to relax, spend time with his family, spend time with Sil, feel at peace. Unfortunately, I don't think this peace is going to last very long. So the Kaladin shippers stocks are through the roof right now. It almost seems like Brandon's writing Sil and Kaladin in a way that they're going to become a couple. So we have Kaladin glances at Sil, who had sidled over to sit closer to him, still human-sized. And then a bit later, Sil rested her head, insubstantial though it was, on his shoulder as he watched the floating blocks. I mean, maybe they're just extremely good friends, but yeah, Kaladin shippers are probably ecstatic right now. So we also learn from Kaladin's dad, Liren, that the battle between the fused and the humans is still ongoing, and it's expected to go all the way up until the deadline of the Contest of Champions. So Kaladin starts imagining these fierce battles over the unimportant and uninhabited land, and he's feeling really sorry for the soldiers who are gonna die. And he speaks to the voice again. He asks, "Is this the storm?" And the voice replies, "No, worse." Then the voice says, "Please, help." Kaladin says, "I don't know if I can help. I don't know what I have left to give. I understand. If you can, come to me." "Where?" "Listen to the bondsmith." "Come to me," the wind repeated, "please." Kaladin is assuming that that means that he should go to Shinovar, which he already has agreed and told Dalinar that he would. And there's a high storm this very night that Kaladin is considering using to power his flight to Shinovar. I really like this part. So Kaladin tells his parents that he's sorry. Dalinar wants me to try to find Ishi, who has apparently gone mad. Not surprising considering how Town and Ash are faring. And his mother gives him an odd look. Kaladin realizes that he's using the herald's names so casually, and that's why she gave him that look. But he stopped revering people he didn't know the day Amaram branded him. God or king, if they wanted his respect, they could earn it. That's very based from Kaladin, and that's awesome. And Liren does something quite out of character. He walks over to Kaladin and gives him a hug, and he tells him that he loves him. So yeah, I really think that these two chapters were the calm before the storm. My personal belief is that Kaladin is going to die in Shinovar, and I think this was foreshadowed way back in Words of Radiance in chapter 59. This is the chapter where Kaladin is imprisoned for calling out Amaram, and Wit comes to visit him. So Wit tells Kaladin a story, and he has Kaladin interject from time to time to help him create the story. The story is about a man running, starting from the east side of Roshar and running all the way across to the west to Shinovar. As Wit is playing his music and telling the story, Kaladin is seeing the imagery from it in his mind's eye, and he sees Fleet as a lanky tall man with tied back long hair that went to his waist. So the lanky tall part really makes me think of Kaladin because he's always described as very tall and very lanky. And this man he's racing a storm. He's running in front of this storm all across Roshar. And this is exactly what Kaladin is planning to do. He's planning to fly in front of a high storm, racing it in a way, all the way to Shinovar. Fleet makes it to the Shinovar, but he's in pretty bad shape. So his muscles raw, eyes barely saw, legs barely walked. But on he went to destiny. The end you know, the end will live. A shock for men to me you'll give. Kaladin gets impatient and he tells him he died. He didn't make it. The end. And then Wit concludes the story like this. Upon that land of dirt and soil, our hero fell and did not stir, his body spent, his strength undone. Fleet the hero was no more. The storm approached and found him there. It stilled and stopped upon its course. The rains they fell, the winds they blew, but forward they could not progress. For glory lit and life alive, for goals unreached and aims to strive, all men must try, the wind did see. It is the test, it is the dream. So in that land of dirt and soil, our hero stopped the storm itself, and while the rain came down like tears, our fleet refused to end this race. His body dead, but not his will. Within those winds his soul did rise. It flew upon the day's last song, to win the race and claim the dawn, past the sea and past the waves. Our fleet no longer lost his breath, forever strong, forever fast, forever free to race the wind. Kaladin asks Wit, what does it mean? And Wit tells him, it's your story. You decide. So I think that this is foreshadowing that Kaladin will die in Shinovar for some reason, not sure why, but he will stay around as a cognitive shadow or perhaps ascend somehow. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section about this theory. All right, those were my thoughts. I'm going to be making videos like this every Monday up until the official release of Wind and Truth on December 6th. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Check out the Discord channel if you want to come and discuss all things Cosmere. We have nearly 50 members already. I'll link that down in the description below. Also consider supporting the channel by either becoming a channel member or becoming a patron. It not only helps the channel out, but you also get access to a bunch of cool perks. I'll link those down in the description as well. That's it for this video. See you in the next one.